Hi everybody, so I decided to do chapter 3, the behaviorist theory, and I'll start with this slide here. This is an overview. It is also exactly how the textbook lays out the structure of what the chapter will discuss. So it starts with the context of the behavioral theory, major theorists. Here we'll discuss Pavlov, Watson, Thorndike, and Skinner. And then we discuss the behaviorist learning pedagogy, which will discuss reward and punishment, behavioral instructional design, and the taxonomies of learning. And lastly, the behaviorist learning technology. So teaching machines, which will have some pictures that go back in time a little bit, and the computer-assisted instruction. So I'll start here. The behaviorist theorists. So here's a graphic of Pavlov, Watson, Thorndike, and Skinner. And this diagram here, stimulus to response, reinforcement, verbal behavior, and then this continuation here, this is an example of what we'll be getting into this chapter. Okay, so the behaviorist theory focuses on which is observational, how people behave, and more importantly, how to change or take away particular behaviors. So this chapter will dive into the important theorists that align. This approach focuses on, This approach focuses on how observable behaviors, essentially what we can see people do and how we can influence or change these behaviors. So Pavlov and Watson found that if a response to a specific stimulus could be repeated, it could be studied and it could be controlled. This means we can observe, measure, and even predict, which is an important word in this concept, how people will respond to the certain stimuli. This theory laid the groundwork for many educational technologies that we use today, for example, the teaching machines and the programmed instruction that I'll get into at the end of the presentation. And we will continue to build on these ideas, okay? So, next. This slide, behaviorist learning theory and major thinkers, I'm going to focus on Ivan Pavlov. I apologize if I didn't say that correct. And he is known for right here, classical conditioning. We have the stimulus to this question, and then the response. The development of behaviorism and the behaviorist learning theory came from this Russian psychologist, Pavlov. So he discovered that reflexes, which are automatic behaviors that are triggered by environmental stimuli, could be conditioned. In his famous experiments, he paired a neutral stimulus, like a bell, which we're probably familiar of, and with an unconditional stimulus, such as food. So initially, the bell alone didn't trigger a response, but over time, the bell began to elicit the same responses with food. So his research showed overall that behaviors can be manipulated and learned through the process of conditioning. His work fundamentally shaped our understanding of how our behavior can be controlled and or modified, laying out the groundwork for further developments in the behaviorist learning theory. Here is a diagram before conditioning, during conditioning, and after conditioning. So before conditioning, the dog's response is straightforward. When food is placed in front of the dog, it salivates naturally. This is an automatic reaction to the food, which is an unconditional stimulus. Then, during conditioning, Pavlov introduces a new element, which is the sound of the bell. The bell was rung just before presenting the food. Repeatedly pairing the bell with the food, the dog began to associate the sound of the bell with the food that will be arriving. After conditioning, the bell alone was enough to trigger salivation, even when there was no food present at all. So this showed that the dog had learned to respond to the bell as if it was a signal for food. The bell had become a conditional stimulus, capable of evoking the same response as the original unconditional stimulus. Here I will talk about John B. Watson, 1878 to 1958. Watson was the first American psychologist to apply Pavlov's ideas, and he is credited with the term behaviorism. Watson viewed psychology as a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. In 1913, his work defined the field as aiming for the prediction and control of behavior, emphasizing that psychology should focus solely on observational actions rather than internal mental processes. So he played a crucial role in establishing behaviorism all throughout the United States. He argued terms like consciousness, mind, or images were irrelevant to psychology. Rather, he believed that psychology should be more about predicting and controlling behavior based on the stimuli and the responses. As he stated, in a system of psychology completely worked out, given the response, the stimuli can be predicted. Given the stimuli, the response can be predicted. This quote underscores his belief that behavior can be systematically studied and controlled through understanding the relationship between stimuli and responses. Next, we talk about our behaviorist learning theorist, Thorndike, 1874 to 1949. His work is referred to as connectionism. So he conducted experiments using a puzzle box, which you can see in examples here. I have two graphics right here for you. And in this puzzle box, he measured how long it took animals to escape by operating a latch within that puzzle box. So his findings supported that learning occurs through forming associations between the stimuli and the responses. So his SR, which is the stimuli response theory, was emphasized that learning is a largely matter of trial and error, and that's an important word here that I bolded that resigns with Thorndike, trial and error, where certain responses become more dominant due to certain rewards. The concept showed how behaviors can be shaped and reinforced through repeated experiences and positive outcomes. Next, I have B.F. Skinner, 1904 to 1990, and this psychologist is known for his theory of operant conditioning. So Skinner explored how direct stimuli could lead to positive responses and result in behavioral change. So his approach focuses on using the positive and negative reinforcement to teach or modify behavior. Unlike other theorists, Skinner concentrated on observable behaviors rather than the internal mental processes. In his experiment, Skinner used, and here I have a graphic of a rat and a slice of cheese in the maze. And Skinner used a maze with a rat as the subject. So the rat moved around the maze and encountered a reinforcing stimulus such as cheese. The cheese served as a reward for the mouse, so encouraging the rat to repeat the behavior of pressing a lever. This example highlights how reinforcement can effectively shape and influence behavior over time. And here is a picture of the Skinner box. So again, in a maze, a rat learns to press a lever for a reward, demonstrating how reinforcement encourages repeated behavior. So the operant part is the rat's behavior of pressing it, which operates on its environment. The reinforcement, the food reward encourages the rat to repeat the behavior, and the behavioral change, the rat now presses a lever more frequently, reinforcing the idea that behavior can be shaped by rewards. All right, the behaviorist learning pedagogy. The behaviorist learning pedagogy focuses on achieving specific intended behaviors by examining the predictable connections between the stimuli and responses. The main goal of this behaviorist learning pedagogy is to promote and modify observable behaviors. In the whole concept of behaviorism, learning is demonstrated through changes in behavior, not internal understanding. Reward and punishment play a central role. This includes using various forms of reinforcement, both positive and negative, as well as implementing consequences that help to shape and change behavior. Behavioral instructional design. So this instructional time is influenced by its context. It emphasizes predictable change in student behavior, which I also found interesting. I did not know that it was influenced by World War II military trainers who emphasized practice and reinforcement and they determined that the learning outcomes required for their performance and identified the specific tasks required to perform the job or skill in training. Okay, and here we are for reward and punishment. Contracts are established between a student and a teacher regarding behavioral change. For example, a student agrees to receive extra help, and the teacher agrees to be available for that individual. Consequences occur immediately after behavior, and that may be positive or negative, long or short-term change. Positive reinforcement, which is known as the reward, is the presentation of the stimulus that increases the likelihood of a response. For example, a teacher smiles at students as they provide correct answers to something. Negative reinforcement increases the likelihood of a positive behavior by removing a consequence that the individual finds to be unpleasant. For example, this can be receiving an 80% test score that will make the final exam optional. So if they were to score an 80% on their test, then the final exam would be optional. Positive punishment refers to adding something that decreases the undesired behavior. For example, after-school detention for coming to class late. And negative punishment refers to removing something that decreases the undesired behavior. For example, this can be missing recess. Okay, so the taxonomies of learning: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation are all learning taxonomies that assist instructional designers in identifying behaviors that could be modified and programmed as learning objectives and tasks. Learning taxonomies provide a type of framework for describing and categorizing behavior we observe. Okay, and our last slide discusses the behaviorist learning technology. So the behaviorism isn't just about instructional design, but it also involves very specific learning steps and technologies that facilitate these steps. So we have our teaching machines. Teaching machines were first developed in the 1920s. These machines presented questions and had mechanisms for learners to respond to. Correct answers were rewarded, which continued to reinforce the desired behavior. Computer-assisted instruction builds on this approach with a drill and practice model. In the computer-assisted instruction, the control over the learning process is embedded within the program designed by educators rather than being managed by the learner. So this approach maintains a structured learning environment that aligns with behaviorist principles. And here I have two images, which now that I'm done reading, I can make bigger. So these are the computer-assisted instruction. And this concludes my presentation on the Chapter 3 Behaviorist Learning Theory, which we discussed the context, the theorists, the pedagogy, and some learning technology.